So on this episode, Ruth, I wanted to share with you something I overheard when I was driving in the car a few days ago. And have you ever had it where you're flicking stations, you're looking for a bit of an upbeat song, you're in a hurry, you're going from A to B, but instead I landed on, partway through, a bit of a talk show, which doesn't normally catch my attention, but there were two ladies, two presenters, and they were talking about reducing alcohol consumption.
Oh, I'm intrigued. Please carry on.
Beep, beep. So
Yeah.
my ears pricked up and I thought, oh, okay, I don't need music. I want to hear what they're talking about. And it's so irritating that I missed the beginning of how they came into the chat. So I genuinely, I won't say the station, I didn't know their names. I couldn't tell you how their discussion came about, but it sounded as though it was on the back of maybe one or two of the studies that's been in the press recently about alcohol. And there's been at least one or two lately. Ruth, I sent you the link that there's been a rise in alcohol-related deaths since the pandemic, right? 2,500 more since 2019. That was a big story in the press for a couple of days.
Yeah, which we've touched quite a lot on our podcast, because for me personally, there was definitely a relationship between COVID and alcohol, and it's really quite interesting when you start to share that with people that you know, and they say, and their immediate response is normally, well, yeah, everybody was in the same boat. And I think there was such a spike in using alcohol to get through such a difficult, unforeseen time in our life.
Yeah, and it's been shown that people who already drank heavily then drank heavier during the pandemic. And it's interesting what you say, Ruth, because I shared that story on my normal Facebook page. It had one reaction. One person.
Oh, really?
Yeah, only one person said it. I wish more people realised how harmful alcohol is. And that was it. And normally, if I post a few things, you always get like a handful of responses. Nothing. Anyway, so I digress, okay? Wow. But that was one story that was in the press around the same time that these ladies were speaking on the radio. And I wonder if it could have been perhaps linked to that and about, reducing alcohol consumption for public health reasons. It sounded like something along those lines. And I found it fascinating because something one of the women said made me go, huh? What? And it was this. She said, if we're supposed to be cutting down and removing alcohol that we know stimulates the pleasure and the reward centres of the brain, surely if you're removing that reward, it's going to dampen and reduce your joy in everything else that brings you pleasure as well.
Oh my God.
I thought, well, for a start, I could hear her bottle of white wine in the fridge from her house, right? I could hear that she was very pro-drinking. I had never thought about this. She said, surely, if you've got to cut down something that brings you pleasure, like wine and alcohol, that's going to mean everything else that brings you pleasure will also be muted or reduced. And I thought, I've just never thought of anything along those lines. What do you make of that?
I've literally, my whole body has gone so tense thinking of that, because I'm concerned for her mental health. If she's that consumed and wrapped up by the thought that alcohol brings so much pleasure that if she takes it out of her life, everything else is going to be rubbish, then she needs to listen to our podcast, clearly. But yeah, and this is the power of it, isn't it? This is, so many times have I heard the phrase, well, I don't really drink at home, but I couldn't imagine going to the pub and not drinking. Yeah. And it's that fact, I cannot enjoy being in a social environment unless I have alcohol. And that's what she's basically saying.
Yeah, well, how am I supposed to have fun if that's taken away? Then how is anything fun? I know that genuinely, Ruth, as I was driving, I felt my brow knitting together. I felt myself frowning, going, is that really what you're thinking and saying, on radio? And there's a second part to this in just a minute. But as I heard it, I thought, no, love, no. I'd argue it's the opposite. I'd argue that once you remove that toxin,
Absolutely.
Here's the thing, it's not straight away. She's probably thinking of withdrawal symptoms in those early few days when you feel muggy and horrible. You can't imagine feeling joy without another nice glass. But fast forward those few weeks when you've thoroughly got it out of your system and you're starting to look around you and seeing what really brings you joy and what really brings you pleasure, then those pleasures and joys are undiluted and they're completely real and authentic and genuine, and they're not generated by a percentage ABV from a bottle. And I thought, oh my goodness, her point of view is so not just different to mine, but upside down and completely opposite my own experience of having given up alcohol and discovered different kinds of joy and pleasure that I don't think that I experienced before when I was drinking quite heavily.
But don't you think it's a little bit irresponsible to sort of voice that on a national radio where people are listening in and absorbing that information and thinking, oh, well, yes, she's absolutely right. It wasn't until I listened to podcasts that changed my mind and changed my perspective and made me question, do I really need to put this carcinogenic, toxic poison into my body to have a good time?
Yeah.
And then you hear other people who don't use alcohol as a social pleasantry and don't use it to get a high and go out and have fun anyway. Those were the people who inspired me. Those are the people who made me question my own drinking. So it's quite sad that she's got a responsibility to voice her opinion on a radio, and it's really quite dangerous what she's done there.
Yeah, and I mean, you know, to point out this was a casual chat thing, it wasn't a news headlines, it wasn't a formal thing, it was clearly a sort of chat piece, and I really wish I had caught the start of it. But do you know what it made me think, Ruth? I thought, that sounds like something I might have come out with 5 years ago, 4 years ago, 3 years ago.
Yeah.
It sounds a bit dated, actually. It sounds like me of old and that popular conception of, yeah, it brings you joy, everyone else is boring, blah, blah. And I thought, gosh, it just feels a bit dated. And like I said, it told me a lot about that presenter and what's in her fridge. And I just found it genuinely fascinating that that's where her mind went, because, you know, the idea of it removing alcohol will then dampen your joy across the board in all other areas. I thought that's a really strong, unusual kind of a statement to make. I mean, I know what I was going to ask you, Ruth. Have you ever heard of glimmers?
No.
Glimmer is something people have been identifying online, which is a moment that you experience of sheer, pure joy when you almost laugh your head off, where you get a surge of adrenaline, where you think, oh my God, I'm just so happy. Where you get one of those moments, I don't know, perhaps one of your favourite old songs comes on, it's blasting and the sun is shining, and just for those few moments, everything feels sparkly and incredible. Or, you know, you maybe do an act of kindness, or you see somebody that you've not seen for ages, and just you have this wonderful moment. They're called those just real little glimmers of pure, undiluted joy. And we all get them, not often, you know, they're not scattered throughout your day. I think you're talking one every few weeks or something, but a moment where everything comes together, where you just feel a surge and a rush of pure pleasure, and you think, oh, everything is wonderful, this is so beautiful and perfect. And I just thought those moments can't exist in the sort of lifestyle, in the way that this lady was sort of inferring. I thought, gosh, I was just so shocked to casually hear this comment as I was driving along, and it be so at odds with what my experience and obviously yours too, by the sound of it.
But don't you think as well, if that's what she means by experiencing these shimmers, whatever shimmer she's going to receive from alcohol is actually going to be a synthetic one. It's one that's made from something which is unnatural, really. And yet the shimmers that you experience when you haven't been drinking are so authentic and so real that they feel even better. Now you've described what it is, I have those quite a lot, really, from sat doing something that I really like, or I've looking forward to a concert or a theatre show or something like that.
Yeah.
I do experience that, but that's because it's a real moment. It's not brought on by a drug.
Yeah. By the way, it's glimmer, not shimmer.
Oh, is it?
But I like your style. I think we should just call it a shimmer from now on.
Yes. Sorry.
Honestly, it's hilarious. When we finish chatting, honestly, just have a little look at the term glimmer, Glimmer, and it's that feeling.
I'll write that down. Glimmer, not shimmer.
No, but it's that pure moment of joy when everything comes together and you're just in the moment and you're thinking, my God, I'm happy. This is wonderful. You know, and you don't get loads of them, but when they happen, it's a really undiluted, pure moment of joy. And it just sounds so far removed from what this lady was saying. Now, what I was telling you is it was sort of in two parts, because by this point, I'm still driving, but I'm nearing my destination. And the second part of the conversation really caught my ear as well, because the other lady commented something along the lines that, well, if we were to remove alcohol, and if we do have to reduce consumption along these lines, I mean, why should we? It's not really affecting anybody else. And if it's not illegal, and as long as you're not hurting anybody else, you can do what you like in your own time. And again, Ruth, I could hear you growling. But again, it reminded me of old me when I was really defensive, saying, look, I'm an adult, I'm functioning, I'm doing the packed lunches, I'm turning up at work, don't question me, I can do what I want. But I thought to myself, you know, as she said that, you know, as long as it's not illegal and you're not hurting anyone else, you can do what you want in your own time. I thought, but love,
it does hurt other people, and it should be illegal. Like, the only reason it's not illegal is because it's such a socially accepted thing in the UK and the world. Well, in some cultures it's not, is it? But in most parts of the Western world it is accepted, and, you know, the government charge loads of tax on it. It's going to be really, really, really hard to make it illegal. But I always come back to my point of, if a person had gone on to Dragon's Den now, if you're not in the UK, Dragon's Den is a TV where people come up with new concepts and basically showcase it to business people and say, this is my new product, I think it's going to sell really well, and they choose whether to invest in the product. If it's going to be successful, they will. If they think it's going to fail, they won't. I just could not imagine somebody going on to Dragon's Den and saying, right, we're going to take all this fruit, we're going to make it rotten, we're going to ferment it, and that rotten, fruity, sludgy slime at the base of it, we're going to drain off, and then we're going to drink it. But by drinking it, it's going to make us feel lethargic, it's going to make us feel impulsive and make stupid decisions, and then the next day you're going to wake up and feel really poorly.
And but have 7 types of cancer linked as well.
Exactly. But... hang on before you all say no. For a few hours while you're drinking it, sometimes less because the come down can be quite fast, maybe for an hour or two when you drink it, you may possibly feel a lot better and a lot happier about yourself. Or it could turn people angry and aggressive. Who knows? You know, it's one of those. Let's just, it's like bloody alcohol roulette, isn't it?
Mm.
Sorry, I went off on a bit of a rant there.
No, but because
it
you're
annoys
right.
me.
Yeah, no, because you're right. Because it is just such a harmful substance, as we now know. Once you educate and you learn and you really investigate the qualities of it, we know that it's harmful. So to hear this sentence that, well, as long as you're not hurting anyone else, that rang so loud to me, because I used to say that phrase, and actually, stepping back and stepping away, I know that it does hurt other people, and it might not be in the moment of having an argument that night when you're drunk, although that counts, but it hurts people because you're not performing at your best. It hurts people because you're forgetful or accident prone or indulging in risky behaviours, or longer term making yourself very, very poorly with your body. So of course it hurts other people. It's just perhaps not in that moment.
But actually, Jane, I would also argue that point. You're hurting nobody, but you know nobody's going to get hurt apart from you. Having worked partly in safeguarding, if I had somebody who was self-harming, physically cutting themselves, which we've had experience with the job that I had, there was absolutely no way I'd look at them and be like, oh, well, they're only hurting themselves, they're not cutting anyone else, so what's the matter?
Yeah.
Why is it any different? They're still physically and mentally harming their body. A blade with one hand or alcohol with the other, it's the same outcome.
I think you're right, until it becomes illegal, until there becomes some sort of a Big Brother style heavy duty intervention on the sale of it as a publicly available product, like tobacco, like that, with those sorts of restrictions. I think that idea is going to prevail. Well, you know, as long as you're not hurting anyone, you can do what you like. And towards the end of the snippet, and I couldn't hear the whole blooming conversation because I had to park up and fetch someone from their class. But towards the end of the conversation, they both referenced knowing a person who partied hard. They worked hard and partied hard, they said, and they made reference to the idea that, well, this study is not going to affect that friend because they're still going to party hard, whatever. And that was kind of, I mean, it wasn't the end of the show, I don't think, but it's the moment where I had to stop listening. And I thought, oh, your friend. No,
yeah.
poor friend.
Yeah.
Friend, come on. And I thought, you know, we're glamorising party hard and living wild. And again, it just took me back, Ruth. It made me think of me in my late teens and early 20s trying to prove I can keep up with the lads, trying to prove that I was fun and I'm up for anything and I'm out. And I thought, yeah, but I'm partly getting older, partly being mid-40s now, but also thinking hopefully the tide and the culture is shifting whereby surely that's not still cool. Surely we're beginning to recognise that doesn't suit everybody. You know, we're becoming a really tolerant society in terms of people's, you know, gender and veganism and preferences for this and preferences for that. And, you know, and I think we're becoming, as a society, a little more open and a little bit more sympathetic to people having opposite points of view and to challenging mainstream notions that have always been popular. And I would just like to think, not directly comparing this to those things, but that, you know, we're beginning to recognise that no, not everybody gets absolutely sloshed, and maybe it's not entirely cool or responsible to suggest that that's normal and okay to get absolutely sloshed. It really, honestly, I must have heard only about 6 minutes of this conversation on the radio, and I put it in my back pocket, Ruth, and I thought, I need to tell Ruth about this. I need to discuss it because I found it just so absolutely fascinating to hear such an opposite point of view and to hear two people so openly pro-drinking. I don't know, maybe I'm just not exposed to hearing that in my circle these days as I'm stuck in the working school run type routine, but it really jumped out at me, and it reminded me of older versions of me, and just made me sort of think, I just want to reach into the radio and like knock and say, ladies, there's another way, you know.
It's quite sad, actually. I feel a bit sad for them. Yeah.
I just wish I'd heard more of the context, you know what I mean? And actually, when I got home later that night, I did try doing a Google search. I put in the radio station brand and I put in female presenters, and I was typing whatever day it was, Wednesday evening, and I was really trying to narrow down if you could listen again or if there was, but as I said, it was quite an informal sort of chat segment of radio, so I'm never going to really work out who that was or what it was. But I thought, gosh, that was going out live across everywhere, quite a pro-alcohol sort of mindset, whereas I think we're just doing our little bit, aren't we, bit by bit with the podcast to do the opposite.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Living a life with less fizz.
Yes.
Thanks for listening to Fizz Free. Find us online on Facebook, YouTube, on X and Instagram, as well as most major streaming platforms. If you'd like to get in touch with the show, the email is fizzfree0, the number 0, @gmail.com. Don't forget to rate us and to give us a like and a share to spread the word. Changing your relationship with alcohol. Less fizz, more free.